I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about what is the good life according to Epicurus. While the word Epicurean is nowadays used to describe wanton overconsumption and hedonism, it is not at all the doctrine of the true Epicureans. Epicurus today may seem like a marginal thinker of ancient Greece, but as a philosophical school, it flourished for over 500 years. Epicureanism presents a unique metaphysics and ethics different from the other major philosophical thought of the 3rd and 4th century BC, which are the Platonic Academy, Aristotle's Peripatetics, and Stoicism. While these traditions were deemed worthy of study by the ancient Christians, they view Epicurus as an atheist and libertine not worthy of preservation, which explains why most of his works are lost to us today. It also spelled the end for the Epicurean school, also known as the Garden, because that is where they learned from the school's founder, Epicurus. Epicurus is known to be a prolific writer, but what remains of his direct teachings are only 3 letters he wrote to his friends and disciples, the Principal Doctrines, which is pamphlet length, and some fragments, all of which can fit into a short book. We only have these letters and Principal Doctrines thanks to Diogenes Laertius, who recorded them in their entirety in Book 10 of the Lives of the Eminent Philosophers within his biography of Epicurus. Some of the remaining fragments are from the works of others who quoted Epicurus, while others were unearthed during the excavation of Herculaneum, which, like Pompeii, was buried under volcanic ash and pumice when Mount Vesuvius erupted. As the excavation works continue today, more of his teachings may still be unearthed, fingers crossed. Metaphysics is the foundation on which Epicurus built his ethical system, but the scientific knowledge we have today has overtaken what the ancient Greeks knew then, making his letter to Herodotus on physics and his letter to Pythocles on the cosmos historically interesting but not quite correct scientifically. Some of the ideas he propounded was the infinity of time and the universe, atoms which have hooks and crevices so that they can form compounds, and indeterminism as atoms can swerve randomly. These ideas are important to his ethics. Because the universe is infinite and eternal, it is uncreated, and hence why he talks about the existence of God or gods, they are perfect and have nothing to do with us. Instead, because of the random swerve of the atoms, we have free will and hence need to figure out how to live for ourselves. In these letters, he also pushed for what we today would recognize as scientific empiricism and observation, where the evidence of our senses are what we have to trust to further our understanding of our world, hence dispensing with myth. His 3rd letter to Minucius remains of great importance as he instructs his friends and student Minucius how one should live in order to have the good life. This letter is for me deeply moving. I've made a video of this analyzing it line by line. Please find the link in the description. What I want to focus on today is his Principal Doctrines, which, as the name suggests, is a manifesto of what Epicureanism stands for. Epicurus dispenses with his metaphysical teachings here, but presents what should follow from it as a pocket-sized guide for his students to easily refer to in order to live well. In summary, Epicurus has a naturalistic conception that we should follow what nature has devised in all living things. Acting in accordance with nature is the correct behavior. Nature has endowed us with the faculty of perceiving feelings as pleasure or pain, making seeking pleasure and avoiding pain the way to lead the good life. As proof of this, Laertius explains, all living creatures as soon as they are born take delight in pleasure, but resist pain by a natural impulse apart from reason. Therefore we avoid pain by instinct. Nature has not given us a faculty to directly perceive what is good or bad, right or wrong, so all we have to go on is the evidence of our senses, which then leads us to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Indeed, we can only conceive the good through our senses. However, we must note that Epicurus' definition of pleasure is not wanton hedonism, but instead merely the absence of pain, both physical and mental pain. We see this from his own example, where he lives on bread and water, having only a bit of cheese occasionally as a feast. If we understand that the limit of pleasure is the absence of pain, then we can rest easy, since what is necessary for us to have is, according to him, easy to obtain, while what is unnecessary is a product of an idle imagination, takes a lot of effort and brings mental disturbance. For those of us plagued by such desires, we need to diminish them so as to become more tranquil. Our goal is ataraxia, which is Greek for tranquility or imperturbability. We want to alleviate physical suffering but also mental disturbances. For Epicurus, the aim of philosophy is a practical one, to bring ataraxia to our souls. He writes, "For just as there is no profit in medicine if it does not expel the diseases of the body, so there is no profit in philosophy either if it does not expel the suffering of the mind." Philosophy is not meant to be an obscure and esoteric discipline for those in ivory towers, but a theoretical venture aimed at guiding people to tranquility. Let us go to the text so that we can understand his doctrines in detail. Like what I did with his letter to Minosius, I will go over it line by line. Such commentaries are the tradition by which texts are studied. I will also supplement it with references to the fragments and Laetius' account of Epicurus. I think it is important to try to figure out for ourselves what each doctrine means, to think through them and see how ancient wisdom can apply to our present lives. These are merely my understanding. I hope the video encourages you to encounter the text for yourself to reach your own conclusions. Part 1. Tetrapharmakos. The 4 fundamental principles necessary for the tranquil life. Doctrine 1. The blessed and immortal nature knows no trouble itself, nor causes trouble to any other, so that it is never constrained by anger or favour. For all such things exist only in the weak. This first principle is similar to what Epicurus had written in his letter to Minosius, where he more explicitly called the blessed and immortal nature God. Because God is so far above us and perfect, he cannot be troubled by anything, including the problems we mere mortals face, and hence cannot be swayed by our supplications. Problems are only faced by the weak such as ourselves, and not by one who is perfect. Thus, Epicurus admits to the existence of God or gods, but also tells us that they do not interfere with the occurrences of the universe. That is, he has a deistic but not a theistic understanding of God. He writes in a fragment, "If God listened to the prayers of men, all men would quickly have perished, for they are forever praying for evil against one another." Doctrine 2. Death is nothing to us, for that which is dissolved is without sensation, and that which lacks sensation is nothing to us. To understand this second principle, we need to first understand the main idea of the Epicureans. Pleasure and pain are the only things of interest to all living things. We seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that is all there is to life. How pleasure and pain is felt by us is through our senses, and they are felt as sensations. Hence, the second principle is that death is nothing for human beings, because when we die, it is the exact point of the cessation of bodily sensations, and since we do not then feel any sensations upon death, we need not fear it, since we cannot suffer its sensations and hence do not suffer any pain from it. Whatever pain that death gives us is not death itself, but the fear of it. But since there is no pain upon the actual occurrence of death, there is hence no need to fear it. Doctrine 3. The limit of quantity in pleasures is the removal of all that is painful. Wherever pleasure is present, as long as it is there, there is neither pain of body nor of mind, nor of both at once. Even as Epicurus believes that pleasure and pain are the driving forces of our actions, we need to understand how he understands pleasure and pain. He divides pleasures into static and kinetic ones. Static pleasures are a negative conception of pleasure, that is, it is the absence of pain. Pain can be bodily pain or from being mentally disturbed. Hence, pain is referring to both physical and mental pain. Kinetic pleasures are pleasures coming from seeking out the agreeable, such as agreeable smells, sights, tactile sensations, or sounds, and is a positive conception of pleasure, which he does not think we should pursue. Other groups of philosophers, such as Cyrenaics, oppose this, believing that increasing our desires and gratifying them is the way of the good life. Epicurus will be against such a conception, since he thinks that seeking kinetic pleasures will increase our pain, as we shall see from the later doctrines. Hence he thinks that pleasures ought to be limited to when we do not feel pain, and that is enough. To pursue more will give rise to possible pain. As an aside, Epicurus' negative conception of pleasure as the absence of pain reminds us of the first noble truth in Buddhism: all life is suffering. The basic condition facing all living things is not pleasure, but suffering. Thus, if we can alleviate our suffering and the suffering of others, we are already doing well. Doctrine 4. Pain does not last continuously in the flesh, but the acutest pain is there for a very short time, and even that which just exceeds the pleasure in the flesh does not continue for many days at once. But chronic illnesses permit a predominance of pleasure over pain in the flesh. Acute pains may be severe but brief, while chronic pains last a long time but are mild, making them both endurable. Hence we can still have a pleasurable life since the quantity of our pleasures can exceed the quantity of our pain. While readers may object that severe pain may not be brief but extended over a long time, Epicurus has in a fragment said that severe pains do not last long since they lead quickly to death. Hence, if a pain does not lead to death, then it is not that severe in his eyes, which should then become what he calls a chronic pain, which is mild though extended over time. Philodemus had summarized the Tetrapharmakos into 4 easy-to-remember lines. Don't fear God, don't worry about death. What is good is easy to get, what is terrible is easy to endure. Part 2. The relation of pleasure and virtue. Doctrine 5. It is not possible to live pleasantly without living prudently and honorably and justly, nor again to live a life of prudence, honor and justice without living pleasantly. And the man who does not possess the pleasant life is not living prudently and honorably and justly, and the man who does not possess the virtuous life cannot possibly live pleasantly. Doctrine 5 is one of the teachings that distinguishes Epicurean thought from those of the other schools. Epicurus equates the good life with a life of pleasure, which is not one of kinetic pleasure but static pleasure, that is, a lack of pain. Here he equates this pleasant or good life with living prudently, honorably and justly. To minimize one's pain, we need to be prudent, honorable and just. Prudence is living within one's means, honor is keeping one's word, and justice is to act fairly towards others. So for him, a good life is to live modestly, keep promises, and act fairly towards others. What is surprising is the obverse formulation. It is not possible to live prudently, honorably, and justly without living pleasurably. If we do not live pleasurably without pain, we are unable to be prudent, honorable, or just. Our translator had filled in some words in square brackets, equating virtue with prudence, honor, and justice. So only a person with a pleasurable life is able to be virtuous, according to Epicurus. If one's life is filled with mental and physical pain, one is unable to be virtuous. Yet by being virtuous, we can reduce our pain. Pleasure is equated to virtue. To seek pleasure, that is to minimize one's pain, is virtuous, according to Epicurus. Virtue is preferred for the sake of pleasure and not for its own sake, explains Laetius. Part 3. Protection from external disturbance. Doctrine 6. To secure protection from men, anything is a natural good, by which you may be able to attain this end. What gives you security from others is a natural good. How can we interpret this term, natural good? I think of it as a good that by our nature we will want to obtain, just like how Epicurus thinks it is natural that we want to maximize our pleasures and minimize our pains. It is part of our nature to want to be secure, and what gives us that security is hence naturally good. Doctrine 7. Some men wish to become famous and conspicuous, thinking that they would win for themselves safety from other men. Wherefore, if the life of such men is safe, they have obtained the good which nature craves, but if it is not safe, they do not possess that for which they strove at first by the instinct of nature. Some people in their desire to be safe thinks that by being famous and known by many, that it will keep them safe. If indeed they become safe from being in the public eye, then their goal is achieved. But if that fame makes them less safe, then they are mistaken and have mistook what by their nature they should do instead. Part 4. The selection of pleasures. Doctrine 8. No pleasure is a bad thing in itself, but the means which produce some pleasures bring with them disturbances many times greater than the pleasures. Since pleasure is the aim, with pleasure being the minimization of pain, if we have pain, we then are not in the state of painless existence. This makes our existence bad. But to obtain pleasure or to minimize pain may require doing things which disturb one's peace of mind or cause other pains, which then overall causes more pain than pleasure. So we need to be cautious of such pleasures, since they cause more pain than the pleasure they give. We have to keep in mind the quality of pain and pleasure. Let us consider what seem to be opposing but equivalent events, say a gain of $1 or a loss of $1. The pleasure derived from gaining that money is much shallower than the pain in losing that money. So to make up for the pain of losing $1 may require not just a gain of $1 but perhaps $5. So a gamble involving risking $1 to gain $1 may not be worthwhile, since that pain of losing that $1 will require a win of $5 to justify the pain from potential loss. Doctrine 9. If every pleasure could be intensified so that it lasted and influenced the whole organism or the most essential parts of our nature, pleasures would never differ from one another. Doctrine 10. If the things that produce the pleasures of profligates could dispel the fear of the mind about the phenomena of the sky and death and its pains, and also teach the limit of desires and of pains, we should never have cause to blame them, for they would be filling themselves full with pleasures from every source, and never have pain of body or mind, which is the evil of life. Pleasures are qualities. The pleasure from eating compared to the pleasure from hearing are of quite different qualities. However, if somehow different pleasures can be intensified so that each becomes the maximum pleasure, the distinction between their qualities disappear. Hence, if base pleasures can extinguish pain to the same extent as higher order pleasures, then we should not look down or despise such pleasures. For instance, if a person finds pleasure in eating, while another finds the same amount of pleasure in art or music, there is no reason to consider one form of pleasure superior to the other. This is in contrast to the thinking of John Stuart Mill, a utilitarian, who writes, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." Mill believes there are higher order pleasures, such as the pleasure found in knowledge, philosophy, or the arts, which so far exceed those of base pleasures that human beings will always choose the higher order ones. In comparison, Epicurus is agnostic over the source of pleasure, so long as it helps extinguish pain, more in line with the conventional utilitarian view where utility and disutility can be expressed in units, ignoring the difference in quality through the quantification. For instance, a disutility of 500 units may apply to losing $10 or getting stung by a bee. Both events do not feel the same, they have a different quality, but that difference is lost in the quantification. That quantification creates an equivalence between the two events, and Epicurus seems to suggest that this equivalence, false or true, is acceptable. Part 5. The ethical value of physical science. Doctrine 11. If we were not disturbed by our suspicions of the phenomena of the sky and about death, fearing that it concerns us, and also by our failures to grasp the limits of pains and desires, we should have no need of natural science. Our pursuit of knowledge arises from our fears and pains. We seek to know because we want to understand phenomena, and also the limits of our capabilities to achieve our desires and to endure suffering. Compare this to Aristotle's account, where humankind first sought to know out of a sense of wonder at the phenomena around them. Epicurus' take is more pessimistic, driven not by the pleasure of knowing but by the fear of the unknown. Doctrine 12. A man cannot dispel his fear about the most important matters if he does not know what is the nature of the universe but suspects the truth of some mythical story. So that without natural science, it is not possible to attain our pleasures unalloyed. To decrease our pain arising from fear of the unknown, we need to understand the nature of the universe through science. If one starts to think and begin to suspect the dogmas he had been enculturated towards, he will need to turn towards science and abandon magical thinking. Gaining knowledge is necessary towards attaining pleasures. To know is to know the truth, since knowing falsehoods is not knowing at all, but is instead being ignorant, the opposite of knowing. So, knowing the truth is needed to gain pleasure. Doctrine 13. There is no profit in securing protection in relation to men, if things above and things beneath the earth, and indeed all in the boundless universe, remain matters of suspicion. To be secure, we first have to gain knowledge of nature and the universe before protecting ourselves against other people. If we have little knowledge of nature, then the threat from nature is greater than the threat from other people. Part 6. The wise man's life in relation to nature, his fellow countrymen, and to true pleasure. Doctrine 14. The most unalloyed source of protection from men, which is secured to some extent by a certain force of expulsion, is in fact the immunity which results from a quiet life and the retirement from the world. The best way to protect ourselves from other people is to have a quiet life and not participate in society, according to Epicurus. Yet he will later in the Principal Doctrines extol the value of friendship. In his will, he also provides for the continuance of his community of Epicureans after his death, in the garden that was purchased for his school. Hence he is not against being with people, but surrounds himself with people he cares about and who are of the same mind as him. He is selective of his society. In today's world where everyone is given a megaphone in the form of social media to tell everyone else about himself, I can imagine Epicurus will tell us to refrain, or at least share what is happening with us and our thoughts only with our friends or community. Doctrine 15. The wealth demanded by nature is both limited and easily procured. That demanded by idle imaginings stretches on to infinity. What we require to ensure our survival are only a few things which are easy to obtain, in contrast to our desires born of our imagination, which are infinite and hence can never be sated. Needs are what we require to survive. Wants are what are in addition to our needs. Our needs are few, but our wants are infinite. In the Fragments, he writes, by means of occupations worthy of a beast, abundance of riches is heaped up, but a miserable life results. To Epicurus, the good life is not the accumulation of wealth, especially if it comes at the expense of our inner peace and happiness. Doctrine 16. In but few things chance hinders a wise man, but the greatest and most important matters reason has ordained, and throughout the whole period of life does and will ordain. Some things are a matter of luck, but they are few for a person who is wise, because for the most important and consequential things, he uses his reason to figure them out. Hence he does not depend on things happening by chance, but makes things happen by using his rationality. Doctrine 17. The just man is most free from trouble, the unjust most full of trouble. As with Doctrine 5, which equates virtue with pleasure and hence with a good life, Doctrine 17 reiterates it. A just person manages to avoid a lot of difficulties, which an unjust person is unable to avoid. Epicurus does not elaborate, but I imagine the general idea is that by treating others fairly, you then do not incur their wrath and indignation, and in turn people will also reciprocate by treating you fairly. On the flip side, if you treat others unfairly, you incur their anger, and they will likewise treat you unfairly. Doctrine 18. The pleasure in the flesh is not increased when once the pain due to want is removed, but is only varied, and the limit as regards pleasure in the mind is begotten by the reasoned understanding of these very pleasures and of the emotions akin to them, which used to cause the greatest fear to the mind. Doctrine 3 states that the limits of pleasure is when all pain is gone. When our needs have been met, the pain from lack is gone, and since that is the limit of physical pleasure, pleasure is unable to increase any further, but merely takes on different forms. This bit is puzzling, but how I understand it is that once we no longer suffer pain from lacking necessities, we do not have any greater amounts of pleasure. So any new thing that is pleasurable does not increase our satisfaction with life. They are merely different from the pleasures that have satisfied our needs. This seems to make them superfluous. For instance, we may suffer from thirst, and we experience pleasure from sating that thirst with water. But once our thirst is sated, we will stop looking for the pleasure of water, but divert it to something else, say to food if we are hungry. But say we are neither hungry nor thirsty or have any other bodily need for the moment, Any other object that can give pleasure is superfluous. If we can understand this, then we can have equanimity in our minds, a calmness because we know we do not need to have to keep seeking things once all pain is gone, out of a fear of lack. We also will know that whatever pleasures that is outside the satisfaction of our needs are superfluous and adds no further pleasure, and hence we will not seek them, which gives us a mental equanimity and no mental pain from unfulfilled unnecessary desires. Doctrine 19. Infinite time contains no greater pleasure than limited time, if one measures by reason the limits of pleasure. Once we have no more pain from lacking what we need, we are already at the limit of what pleasure we can achieve. In that case, more time does not give us any greater pleasure, since we are already at the limit of the amount of pleasure we can even have. Doctrine 20. The flesh perceives the limits of pleasure as unlimited, and unlimited time is required to supply it. But the mind, having attained a reasoned understanding of the ultimate good of the flesh and its limits, and having dissipated the fears concerning the time to come, supplies us with a complete life, and we have no further need of infinite time. But neither does the mind shun pleasure, nor when circumstances begin to bring about the departure from life, does it approach its end as though it fell short in any way of the best life. If we follow Epicurus' doctrine, we will have understood that there is a limit to pleasure, the limit being the extinguishment of pain, after which we can enjoy no further pleasure even if more agreeable things happen to us. It is like how our appetite for pleasure is sated. However, the body still wants more pleasure. Its thirst for pleasure is unlimited, and hence having an unlimited thirst, unlimited time is required to fulfill it. However, our minds can control such an urge, because it knows there is a limit, and the attempt by our bodies to try to have more and more pleasures beyond the limit is futile. Hence there is no need for infinite time, since we do not have to fulfill infinite pleasures. We can enjoy pleasure that while limited is sufficient to give us ataraxia, for Epicurus a tranquility that comes from an absence of bodily pain and mental disturbance. We also know that death is not to be feared according to Doctrine 2. Thus our lives can be complete and we can live the good life with just the finite life that we have. When the time comes for us to die, we need not die with a sense that we failed to live complete lives, that we are unfulfilled, but instead we can know that we have lived the good life. Doctrine 21. He who has learned the limits of life know that that which removes the pain due to one and makes the whole of life complete is easy to obtain, so that there is no need of actions which involve competition. Knowing that there are limits to pleasure beyond which we are unable to enjoy more of is a liberation, so we do not have to keep endlessly pursuing more and more of it. We can hence be complete and assured that a good life can be achieved and is not a target always shifting further whenever we get near it. Epicurus reiterates Doctrine 4 and 15, that what we need is easy to get. Hence we need not engage in competing with others and engage in fighting, snatching or stealing to get it. Part 7. The tests and standards of moral that is truly pleasant action. Doctrine 22. We must consider both the real purpose and all the evidence of direct perception, to which we always refer the conclusions of opinion. Otherwise all will be full of doubt and confusion. If you fight against all sensations, you will have no standard by which to judge even those of them which you say are false. We can only trust our senses and what it tells us. For any opinion, we have to check it against the evidence provided by our sense perception. If we do not do that, we will be filled with doubt and confusion over what is true and what is false. The evidence of the senses are the only standards which we have to make judgments on truth and falsity. According to Laertius, the Epicureans reject logic as misleading. It is sufficient for physicists to be guided by what things say of themselves, he writes. What things say of themselves is what we perceive of them through our senses. Epicurus considers sensations as pure data because they are unprocessed by our cognition and not contaminated by our memories, because what is sensed does not come from the sensory apparatus itself and is unable to add or take away what is sensed. This idea of pure sensation has since been debunked most clearly by Immanuel Kant, who explains that all our representations are filtered through the categories in our cognition, and we can never get to the thing in itself. Nonetheless, observation using our sense perception remains useful in science. Doctrine 24. If you reject any single sensation and fail to distinguish between the conclusion of opinion as to the appearance awaiting confirmation and that which is actually given by the sensation of feeling or each intuitive apprehension of the mind, you will confound all other sensations as well with the same groundless opinion, so that you will reject every standard of judgment. And if among the mental images created by your opinion, you affirm both that which awaits confirmation and that which does not, you will not escape error, since you will have preserved the whole cause of doubt in every judgment between what is right and what is wrong. Opinions only become fact after they have been attested to by our sense perception. If we reject what one of our senses is telling us or the direct intuitions of our mind, we will then have no basis to judge things. We will then conflate what our senses tell us with unproven opinions. If we affirm both opinions that still need to be confirmed with opinions that have already been confirmed, we are lost because we will now doubt the truth of what has been confirmed and admit as truth what has not been confirmed. Doctrine 25. If on each occasion, instead of referring your action to the end of nature, you turn to some other nearest standard when you are making a choice or an avoidance, your actions will not be consistent with your principles. In any decision making, our process should check how well each alternative helps us towards our goals. Epicurus talks about the end of nature, a kind of ultimate goal. In every creature is the natural goal of maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, with the Epicurean understanding that the limit of pleasure is the absence of pain. So we should keep this in mind when making a decision. Does our proposed action give us pleasure or lessen our pain? Are we already free from pain, which means that no further action will give us any further pleasure? If we do not check a proposed action with these ultimate goals, instead using another reference or standard to help us make our choice, we may run into contradictions since these standards may not be in line with the Epicurean principles. Doctrine 26. Of desires, all that do not lead to a sense of pain if they are not satisfied are not necessary, but involve a craving which is easily dispelled when the object is hard to procure or they seem likely to produce harm. Epicurus makes an important distinction between the type of desires we have. There are desires which are necessary to be fulfilled and desires which are not necessary to be fulfilled. The desires that are not directed towards quelling pain are not necessary desires. They are a craving for things that are hard to obtain and are harmful, and so we should dispel such desires. What causes pain is not the deprivation of what we want, but unfulfilled desires. Part 8. Friendship. Of all the things which wisdom acquires to produce the blessedness of the complete life, far the greatest is the possession of friendship. Epicurus places a high value of friendship even as he talks about retreat from society in general. Wisdom directs us towards a complete life. Our wisdom tells us what we need, and to Epicurus, the most important thing we need in order to have the good life is friends. Note that it is not family, children, wealth, fame, or power, but friends that is by far the greatest to produce the good life. Doctrine 28. The same conviction which has given us confidence that there is nothing terrible that lasts forever or even for long has also seen the protection of friendship most fully completed in the limited evils of this life. A consolation of misfortune and pain is that it does come to an end and may not last very long. Friends also help shield us from the evils of life. Friendship comes to its fullest development when it is successfully tested by the evils of life. Part 9. The classification of desires. Doctrine 29. Among desires, some are natural and necessary, some natural but not necessary, and others neither natural nor necessary, but due to idle imagination. We already saw some classification of desires in Doctrine 26. Here, Epicurus gives a fuller classification of which there are three. There are 1. Natural and necessary desires, 2. Natural and unnecessary desires, and 3. Non-natural and hence unnecessary desires which arise from our idle imagination. Doctrine 30. Wherever in the case of desires which are physical but do not lead to a sense of pain, if they are not fulfilled, the effort is intense. Such pleasures are due to idle imagination, and it is not owing to their own nature that they fail to be dispelled, but owing to the empty imaginings of the man. We experience some physical desires which, if left unfulfilled, do not lead to pain. These are unnecessary desires which require a lot of effort to fulfill and come from our idle imagination. Part 10. Justice and Injustice. Doctrine 31. The justice which arises from nature is a pledge of mutual advantage to restrain men from harming one another and save them from being harmed. Epicurus thinks of justice as a matter of agreement between people. Its aim is to prevent people from harming one another and to save them from being harmed by others. Doctrine 32. For all living things which have not been able to make compacts not to harm one another or be harmed, nothing ever is either just or unjust, and likewise too for all tribes of men which have been unable or unwilling to make compacts not to harm or be harmed. If no agreement exists between individuals or between groups of people, such as an implicit or explicit social contract, there is no such thing as justice. This is similar to Thomas Hobbes' account in his Leviathan. Doctrine 33. Justice never is anything in itself, but in the dealings of men with one another in any place whatever and at any time, it is a kind of compact not to harm or be harmed. Justice is not something absolute that exists, but is an agreement between people governing how they deal with one another so that they are not harming or harmed by one another. Injustice is not an evil in itself, but only in consequence of the fear which attaches to the apprehension of being unable to escape those appointed to punish such actions. The evil that arises from acting unjustly is not injustice in itself, since justice and its negation, injustice, do not exist absolutely but only in reference to the agreement between people. The evil from injustice for the unjust is due to the fear of being unable to escape punishment from the punishers. It seems Epicurus was thinking of the authorities as the punishers since he talks about those appointed to punish, but I believe the same applies if the punishers are the offended, vigilantes, or a mob. Doctrine 35. It is not possible for one who acts in secret contravention of the terms of the compact not to harm or be harmed, to be confident that he will escape detection, even if at present he escapes 1,000 times. For up to the time of death, he cannot be certain that he will indeed escape. A person who breaks the agreement even in secret and is so far uncaught can never be sure that he will always be able to escape detection, even if he has escaped before. It can only be certain when he dies without detection. Hence this gives rise to mental disturbance, since he will always be troubled by this uncertainty and the fear of punishment. Doctrine 36. In its general aspect, justice is the same for all, for it is a kind of mutual advantage in the dealings of men with one another. But with reference to the individual peculiarities of a country or any other circumstances, the same thing does not turn out to be just for all. The social contract, the general agreement between the people, treats everyone the same. However, because individuals differ from one another because of nationality, situation, or other specificities, specific laws may favor one person or group over another, making it unjust. Doctrine 37. Among actions which are sanctioned as just by law, that which is proved on examination to be of advantage in the requirements of men's dealing with one another has the guarantee of justice, whether it is the same for all or not. But if a man makes a law and it does not turn out to lead to advantage in men's dealings with one another, then it no longer has the essential nature of justice. And even if the advantage in the matter of justice shifts from one side to the other, but for a while accords with the general concept, it is nonetheless just for that period in the eyes of those who do not confound themselves with empty sounds, but look to the actual facts. The aim of a social contract is justice. Justice is served when there is mutual advantage when individuals deal with one another. Sometimes it may advantage one side more than the other, but so long as mutual advantage remains, even if it is not completely balanced, the law is just. However, if a law is made that does not lead to mutual advantage, then it is a bad and unjust law. It defeats the point of law, since it either serves no one or some specific group always to the detriment of another group, which is what injustice is. Doctrine 38. Where, provided the circumstances have not been altered, actions which were considered just have been shown not to accord with the general concept in actual practice, then they are not just. But where, when circumstances have changed, the same actions which were sanctioned as just no longer lead to advantage, there they were just at the time when they were of advantage for the dealings of fellow citizens with one another, but subsequently they are no longer just when no longer of advantage. If the concept of a law does not accord with what is actually happening, that law is not just. When circumstances change so that what was previously a just law no longer provides mutual advantage, then that law is no longer just. Part 11. The Wise Man's Life in the Epicurean Community. Doctrine 39. The man who has best ordered the element of disquiet arising from external circumstances has made those things that he could akin to himself, and the rest at least not alien. But with all to which he could not do even this, he has refrained from mixing, and has expelled from his life all which it was of advantage to treat thus. A person who aims to reduce pain, that is bodily pain and mental disturbance, will try to manage his affairs such that he makes most things amenable to himself, and for the rest at least not a source of pain. For any remaining things that he is unable to tame as such, he avoids or expels it from his life. Doctrine 40. As many as possess the power to procure complete immunity from their neighbours, these also live most pleasantly with one another, since they have the most certain pledge of security, and after they have enjoyed the fullest intimacy, they do not lament the previous departure of a dead friend, as though he were to be pitied. Self-sufficiency is an important theme for the Epicureans. When one is secure in himself and need not depend on others, they can live pleasantly with the others. When one has enjoyed the deepest friendship with others, one need not be sad that they have passed away, since death is nothing to fear, and hence there is no need to pity the dead friend. Self-sufficiency gives a person freedom, and according to Epicurus, the greatest of all riches. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.